everyone. Welcome to another session for the Demand Gen Summit. I'm here with Vlad Blagojevic. Vlad, did I get your name right?
Very good, very
Oh,
good.
awesome. Pretty good from a kid from a small town in Idaho to nail that. So, Vlad, first, we're going to be talking about Demand Gen, obviously, and your approach and your philosophy over there at Full Funnel. But for those of you that don't know Vlad, he's one of the co-founders of FullFunnel.io. They're a Demand Gen consultancy agency, and and they've got an interesting approach to Demand Gen compared to what I think a lot of people are doing. So, but before we get into that, Vlad, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I'm a co-founder of FullFunnel.io, and what we do is we work with brands, B2B tech brands with high ACV, usually multiple buyers, complex sales cycles, and we help them drive demand and implement what we call full funnel marketing framework to actually land opportunities, increase the win rate, increase the ICV, etc. So the way that we do this is we have consulting training, and we started actually just 2 years ago as an unknown brand, and since then we have actually built our own we do what we preach, so we build our own demand gen program or strategy that actually so far I think it generated 176 opportunities, 72 five-figure opportunities this year qualified. We've grown our LinkedIn following up to more than 40K people so far. Our newsletter, which we never promote, by the way, we grew it to almost 12K. We had more than 7,000 people attend our events. We had landed speaking gigs at dozens of events, podcasts, like Nathan Slatka, B2B Growth, he's founder 500, Edwards, a lot of the other like B2B Growth, one of the biggest podcasts in our space, got published by, companies and websites like CXL, Marketing Pros, Terminus, and kind of established ourselves as go-to guys when it comes to full funnel and ABM especially. And the best part of the whole story is that we've done this with 2 FTEs, basically while building our products, our business, consulting our clients.
Awesome. I love it. So, what do you think? I mean, like before, let's talk about how you guys do things. Like, what do you think is wrong with how most people are doing demand gen right now?
All right. I think you had something you can share. Maybe it's easier for people to follow here. I think that if you look at how most companies market, how most B2B companies market, they will do things like publish an SEO article every week and maybe a white paper every quarter or twice a quarter, whatever their cadence is. And what's wrong with that content that is produced like that is that often it's optimized for keywords. It doesn't really have a lot of impact. It's like kind of me too superficial content that doesn't really impact the buyers. And the way that it's being distributed, usually other than paid, it's dropping links on social. If you look at their social handles, it's usually a lot of self-promotional awards and news and look at us, what we did and our products. And why this doesn't work is because it doesn't really impact the buyers. They don't get their content. It doesn't stand out. They don't get it to people who they actually want to influence. And then the way that they do quote unquote demand generation is basically, whether that's that white paper that they promoted or a webinar or whatever they're running, generating leads and then sending those leads to sales. Maybe in the meantime, they have nurturing sequence, which is kind of like 5 email sequence or something, and they send it to sales, or they simply run cold ads or cold email, send people to some sort of a landing page, driving these demo calls, etc. And the reason why that doesn't work is because there's no intent, right? The fact that you downloaded a piece of content or attended a webinar, it just means that you want to learn. It doesn't mean that you're buying. And sending those as we know, like the majority of the market is not in the buying mode, so you're wasting like 97% of all that budget on trying to engage buyers that are not actually buying. And if you look at all of these approaches, um, I mean, and even if they're buying, there is another problem, is that if you're just capturing demand, if you're doing nothing to create a demand and differentiate yourself at the end, you end up being perceived as a commodity. You usually have a very high cost of acquisition, very low win rates, and you don't have a lot of, you don't win a lot of good deals, like especially high ACV deals. You don't win them because you're quite often too late to the party, right? And the other competitors have been positioning themselves for quite a while. And if you look at all these approaches, what they have in common is they're kind of trying to, they're marketing the way that they want to sell. They're not marketing in the way that the buyers are actually buying.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. That like we do a lot of stuff because we have a process that we're like, hey, this is our process, and if you want to buy from us, like fit into the process somehow. And every company is going to be different in how they buy, and I think sometimes it's easy for us to forget, especially in B2B, that like we're selling to people. As much as we sell to companies, ultimately like it's people making the decisions. So what do you think people should be doing differently? Like how can we really go and meet the buyers where they want to be met and how they want to be met?
Well, let me first start with an example, right? So we did a lot of research on the way that the buyers are buying, and maybe if you switch to the next one here, I have worked out an example, and at the end, I think it was like a 40x step. So just very quickly, this was when a marketer saw a comment from his friend on LinkedIn and started following me or engaged with one of my LinkedIn posts, and I reached out to them to connect to them. And I usually, send out to people a welcome message mentioning our community. He joined our community, saw an announcement from Andre about a webinar that we were running, a partner webinar we were running. He joined the webinar. So a content hub that we shared after the webinar, and he shared one of the case studies when in the content hub with his CMO. I saw in the content analytics that the CMO was checking that case study. I went out and reached out to her. She didn't really engage, so a lot of time has passed by. They were kind of like following me without really engaging, until there was an internal trigger. So something happened internally that basically they had a bad board meeting, they missed their targets, and as the shit tends to roll down in these kind of companies, they had to do something about it, and they got new targets for the next year, more ambitious. And after seeing another LinkedIn post from us, the CMO asked their marketer to attend our summit. We are doing funnel marketing summit every year, and there they saw a bunch of presentations, and they saw, among others, like how we go about planning and creating a GTM strategy. He shared that slide with the CMO. CMO asked to book a call. After a lot of back and forth, they had a call. They asked for a proposal, sent them a proposal, but then went silent. And what happened actually was that he couldn't make basically business case, answer some critical questions. Meanwhile, Andre actually reached out proactively to the CMO, invited her to our podcast, chatted about her stuff, challenges, the way they do marketing on the podcast. And by the way, also asked her what was going on with our deal. She mentioned what was happening, and I could then, reach out to the marketer and help him build that business case. We did an engagement, we delivered a project. We had good results. At the end, I organized a webinar where we shared this publicly, which helped us land new deals, et cetera, et cetera. So all this big example is just to share that, by the way, this is just like a little piece of the puzzle, part of the picture that we see. We didn't actually see all the other things that they have done. And you can see how many steps, they say 7 touch points. I think there's like more than 40 steps here that I just illustrated. And it goes from very top of the funnel being the awareness, and just can't sell if there's not an internal trigger and some urgency and some like push internally for them to consider this being a priority. and then all the way until the end. That's why we call it also full funnel marketing, because actually the way that we sold the got the value out of that was through, first implementing a smaller project and then the bigger one, then creating that case study, sharing that internally. So you keep on marketing until, not just until you hand over that lead to the sales, but all the way until the as long as the relationship is basically going on.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting to see the whole journey as you laid it out here. It's a lot of different steps. It's not linear by any means. They go back and forth, and as I think of just deals that we win and lose, I'm like, yeah, this it makes sense. Like every once in a while, you get somebody that's just like, I'm ready to buy. Let's hop in, let's evaluate, and let's go through it. But I think even in the economy today, like it's a little more like this than it is, hey, let's get ready to rodeo. So what do you think, like, how do you take this process though and like turn into something that you can replicate at some level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the reflection that people will have when they see the process that is complicated like that would be like, oh, so let's build some complex funnels to try to kind of control that and
Yeah,
recognize these triggers and all of that. But that's just impossible, right? Especially because most of the conversations actually happen outside of your funnel and you don't really have that much influence. So maybe if you switch to the next one, this is how we present the framework, right? So the first part is all about activities, channels, content that you use to generate demand. Maybe you can't read that, but essentially there's a bunch of different activities, and I'll share, instead of like going through those, I will share some of the activities that we use to get the results that I shared at the beginning, right? Now, what is really important is that there are two pieces of the puzzle that are often missed. The first one is that when you think about whatever you're doing, whether you're doing the podcast, whether you're active on social, paid or organic, it's thinking about the audiences. And people often see it very narrowly. The people think about the audience as their target buyers, target accounts, even like, worst of all, like the decision maker who is usually the most busy, who is not really interested in the details of your solution. They may be interested kind of category and the business case, but not really in the solution as such, and the details that you're normally sharing in your demand gen content activities. So what the first thing you want to realize is you want to influence your own with the whole buying committee, right? But then you also want, and the way that you influence them is basically distributing all that content through whatever you own, whether that's an email list, whether that's the social following, all of these things. Maybe you're doing some paid, but the second part is really important. That's actually the borrowed audience, or proxy audience, whatever you like to call it. And these are people that your buyers already trust, or they're connected to them, right?
yep,
And you have different kinds of people. You have guys like you who are doing this summit, and being here, having the privilege to speak here, I'm lucky to be able to get access to your audience. So your audience that you worked so hard to get, of course, now I'm having that access, and now they're learning about me and what we do. So this is like one example. Another example is just even co-creating. Like I could have invited you, or we run our own summit. What you're doing actually now, you're co-creating with me, you're co-creating with other people that your potential customers already follow and trust, and you're kind of tapping into that audience as well, right?
yep,
And authority, not just audience, but credibility, authority, etc., etc. And then the third point here in terms of audiences is kind of like, I'm not a big fan of the term like dark social, but like I mentioned, a lot of the conversations happen outside of your funnel. You cannot influence them. People are sharing content. Like a lot of times, if you're creating good content, a lot of times what I'm getting as feedback is like, hey, I've been like, or maybe better, a story. Like one of the recent deals that we closed, I only spoke to the CFO for some reason. That's not usually our buyer, but the CFO brought me into their company, and that's how we started having a conversation. I ended up talking to 5 people in total, and they all kind of knew me. And I was like, wow, I never saw you on LinkedIn. I never say like, you're not subscribed to our newsletter. Like, but actually what was happening is that a CFO who was a fan, he was sharing our post in their Slack. And that's how it was. So what you want to be is you want to be where the buyers are, and you want to be maybe also in the communities. Like recently, we also in the Demand Gen community uh, from Get Accept, I think they're running a community there. We are active there, and I just saw like people are asking about our playbooks, and then you saw the whole conversation about it. So being in that community, again, sharing content, not and engaging with people, not just dropping promotional links,
Yeah.
is another way that you can influence it. And then another thing that people forget, and there's the third layer here, the bottom one, when we're talking about capturing the demand, a lot of people are thinking about, things like, and talking about things like, okay, you need to remove the friction points. Absolutely. Like you want to make it easy for the buyers to buy from you. And unfortunately, a lot of B2B companies make it super complicated, right?
Yeah.
With all the chatbots and pop-ups and SDRs and handovers and confusing copy and lack of information, lack of transparency, and all of these things, right? That B2B companies are doing to make it hard for you to buy from them. But there is actually, if you think about it, you've worked so hard to generate that demand, and people who are ready to buy, they're going to reach out to you. But what do you do with the others? Do you just wait passively for them to reach out to you? And we don't really believe in just the passive demand capture, because I think there is like, you're leaving a lot of money on the table, and there's a bunch of things that you can use to capture demand in a more proactive way. And what I just give you a few examples. Now, before I give those examples, maybe it's important to understand that what you don't want to do is you don't want to have somebody sign up for your webinar or attend your webinar, and then you're basically passing them on to sales. We said this doesn't work. There's no intent. But how can you gauge that intent? How can you basically use the data that you have, the engagement that your demand gen programs have generated? Well, what you can do is you can check different sources of engagement and intent data, like, people visit, or accounts, target accounts visiting your website, visiting and spending, if enough time, whatever you define being, kind of a threshold for them, spending on key pages of your website, your product pages, your pricing pages, whatever the relevant pages are. You can also, especially if you're active on platforms like LinkedIn, you can also check what kind of engagement you're getting from your target accounts, what kind of topics they're interested in. And after a while, you start noticing, these people are coming back, they're attending our events, they're visiting our website. So basically what you're doing is you're checking this data, and we actually have somebody in our team who has a playbook, who has a clear definition of, okay, what is the threshold? What kind of pages should they be checking? How long? Like, at least like 20, 30 minutes long, checking at least these pages. Then second, you want to check the fit. Like, are they a fit with
Do they
the
fit
IC?
your customer profile you want?
Exactly. Absolutely. And also what we do as well is we segment, accounts into 3 different tiers: tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And of course, it doesn't make sense to treat the most valuable account the same as the least valuable one. 300K and a 5K account, you don't want to treat them the same way. So based on this information, now you can decide, okay, what are the kind of things that we can do with them. And you can, that's usually actually where the way that we explained, where things like ABM and demand gen meet in that exact place. But you can obviously continue that conversation, turn that engagement into a conversation, maybe on social if they were engaging on social. Offer them, more, start a conversation about, okay, but why, for example, they were interested in ABM. Is this something that are running internally, etc.? You can offer them more, information about it. You can share case studies, proactively distribute case studies are great to, continue the conversation, because they can see, okay, not just the result, but how you do things, learn something. So there is a bunch of activities that you can do to move that and to move that into an opportunity, right? And to accelerate, essentially accelerate that process. And if you look at our pipeline, if you look at our opportunities and deals, usually, and the example that I shared, you saw that in that example there were a lot of proactive steps,
Yep.
right? And that was the combination, what we call kind of not just purely inbound nor purely outbound, but what we call all bound, when you're combining the best of both worlds to get the maximum.
I like it. I like it. One thing before we move on to anything else, you talked about, hey, we got to look for some thresholds for activity before we move on. I know it's going to be different for every customer a little bit, but what are the top 2 or 3 things that you would say, like, look for these, these thresholds, and usually if you're around there, like, that is a good sign of intent.
Yeah, I mean, I gave some examples in terms of like if you're looking at the website visits, you're having multiple visits from multiple people. They're checking out, especially intent, like
Yeah.
they're reading blog posts is very different. If they're checking out your product pages, they're coming back several times.
Yeah.
They're spending, they're not just landing there and clicking away, but they're spending, like, it's not unusual for us to see an account spending 2 hours on our website, actually, in
Yeah.
total, right? With multiple sessions. So our threshold is half an hour, like 30 minutes, and multiple visits and high intent pages. When it comes to the website, that's a simple example, but it could be, combinations of attending like a middle of the funnel, some sort of a case study, whatever, webinar,
Yeah.
or diving deeper into case studies, or description of the way that you do things, or your guides and stuff. And then maybe engagement on social, or another signal that you could use as well. And it doesn't mean that you only have to reach out to those who pass the threshold. It just means that those that pass, it's just a prioritization, and you can still have a conversation with people who have engaged, who haven't passed that threshold, and try to continue the conversation, offering more content, having a chat about what they're doing. It doesn't have to be necessarily always about, driving,
Yeah.
that buying intent, driving that opportunity.
Okay, I like it. I like it. Before we wrap up, because we're running out of time, anything else that we should be thinking about as we go through and evaluate our demand gen programs and how we run them?
Well, one thing, maybe that's kind of the last slide. I wanted to give you an overview, and I promised to share the activities. The easiest way for you to think about it, not to overcomplicate it, is to create a kind of a calendar. And this is a simple calendar that we use, relatively simple, of daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly activities, like daily, creating posts on LinkedIn, engaging with the audience, weekly newsletter. We have live podcasts. We have monthly webinars where we dive deeper into our frameworks, share case studies. We have some quarterly, like in-depth workshops. We have our summit, like you guys have your summit every year. So this is one way to operationalize that, because that's the most important thing. The most important thing, and the only way this works, is if you find a way to run this consistently. And the only
Yeah,
way you will be able to do that if you have it operationalized, right?
couldn't agree
And
more.
not complicate it too much.
For sure, for sure. I love it. Thank you, Vlad, for joining us and being part of the Demand Gen Summit for the fall of this year. And thank you, and everyone else. If you want to learn more about Vlad and what they're doing, what's the best place for people to check you guys out?
Definitely on LinkedIn, or go at fullfunnel.io. And just wanted to thank you guys for organizing this. Is just amazing, and really happy that you decided to invite me here as well. Very privileged. Thank you very much.
Well, the honor is all ours. Thank you, Vlad.